Now that you've set up your Shell LubeAnalyst account and registered your equipment, you're ready to begin sending oil samples to the lab. When you register your equipment and components, each is assigned a unique LubeAnalyst number. This number stays consistent and allows the system to know exactly which piece of equipment it is looking at. The first set of numbers represent the equipment, and the second, the component. And because oil sampling is a great way to understand your engine's health, what matters most now is pulling a sample properly. If the oil sample isn't pulled properly, you won't get a reliable analysis. As industry veterans say, junk in is junk out. In this video, we'll review the 3 main ways to pull an oil sample so you can avoid sending in junk samples. But first, let's go over a few general ground rules. The best practice is to pull a sample while the engine is live. If this isn't possible, pull the sample within 30 minutes of shutting the engine down. A Shell Lubricants technical advisor can help you determine if and how you can pull a sample while the engine is live. Whether you pull a sample while the engine is running or after it is turned off, it is important that you always do it the same way. For example, you can set a shop rule that you always pull a sample exactly 5 minutes or as close to 5 minutes as possible after turning off the engine. Consistency is important in order to recognize patterns with the analyzed data. The more consistency you create in your sampling practices, the more reliable your data will be because you'll have fewer variables between your samples. Now, before you begin to pull any sample, make sure your equipment is at or close to its normal operating temperature. After the engine stops and the oil sits, contaminants such as wear particles, dirt, water, and coolant are allowed to settle out. It is important to get an oil sample that is representative of what is moving through the engine. If the contaminants are allowed to settle, the sample is no longer representative of what is moving through the engine. You'll also want to make sure the sample bottle is filled about 3/4 of the way, up to but not over the fill line. This allows for any possible expansion and, more importantly, allows the lab to properly agitate the sample prior to testing. This ensures resuspension of any particles or contaminants to achieve accurate and meaningful test results. Carefully unpack the sample kit, placing all parts on a clean surface. Affix the bar-coded sticker from the checkbook page onto the bottle and write the component number on the bottle. This will eliminate placing the label on the wrong sample. Do not remove the sample bottle lid until you are ready to take the sample. Make sure checkbook page is properly dated, has the miles since the previous PM, oil type, and any unusual operating situation should be noted. Also, remember to carefully manage the sample container and its contents. Don't let the bottle sit open and get dirty. This could skew the lab results. You should send the sample to the lab immediately. Because an oil sample indicates the condition of the oil and the equipment at the time it's taken, it's important to promptly send it in for analysis. Now we'll review the 3 ways you can pull a sample, which are from the oil drain, with a vacuum pump, or by using a probe valve. Gathering a sample from an oil drain during normal planned maintenance is the least desirable method of pulling a sample. This is because it is the least likely way to get a representative sample of the engine oil. The drain plug is set at the low point of the oil pan, where contaminants settle. By taking a sample from here, you may get skewed results because of the contaminants that may be found at the bottom of the oil pan. However, if this is your only option, begin by removing the drain plug, but don't take the sample right away. Drain a minimum of 1 pint of oil out before taking the sample. This is to avoid collecting gross contamination in the sample bottle. Drain the lubricant into the clean sample container, filling it to a minimum 3/4 full. When finished, always make sure the cap is closed on tightly. To improve on the results from drain plug, try a vacuum pump tool. Use the dipstick to determine how long your plastic sampling tube should be. By using the oil line on the dipstick, you will not pump oil from the absolute bottom, which would result in a sample with too much settled contaminants. Then, you'll insert the tube through the head of the vacuum pump and tighten the lock ring. The tube should extend about 1 inch into the bottle beyond the base of the vacuum pump head. Next, just screw on the sample jar to the bottom of the vacuum pump and tighten securely. Once the tube is secured onto the vacuum pump, put the sampling tube into the dipstick port. Be sure to wear proper PPE, including gloves, when pulling oil samples. The oil will be hot, and the tubing and sample bottles are not insulated, so wear gloves to adequately protect you from hot oil. Now, push and pull the vacuum pump plunger a few times to start the suction. Continue pumping until the sample jar is 3/4 full. Hold the pump upright in order to avoid residual contamination from the vacuum pump. Finally, unscrew the sample jar from the vacuum pump and tighten its lid securely. Drain the remaining fluid out of the tube back into the reservoir and remove the tube from the fill port. Unscrew the locking ring on the vacuum pump and remove and properly dispose the used tube. Never reuse them. The third option for gathering a sample, using a probe valve, provides the most representative sample possible. To pull a sample from here, you need the engine to be running, so you're pulling from a live stream of fluid. This best represents what is flowing around the engine. Of course, not all engines will have sample valves, so this depends on your fleet's engine specifications. Before you begin, you'll need to clean the sample valve prior to use. Insert the needle probe on the end of the pump tool into the valve to flush out the fluid. You do not need to use the pump. Next, attach the sample bottle onto the probe instrument, then securely attach it onto the engine sample valve, inserting the needle probe into the valve. Fill the sample bottle a minimum 3/4 full. When you've got all the lubricant you need, remove the needle probe to stop the lubricant flow. Securely attach the lid to the sample bottle, then put the valve's protective cap back on. Clean up any fluid on or around the valve. After you've got your sample, regardless of which process used to obtain it, it's time to fill out your checkbook page. If the component is already registered, the most important information you can provide is the unique LubeAnalyst number, both on the form and on the sample label, in case the two become separated. Also fill in other key information, such as the site ID number, contact person, sample date, miles or kilometers, and any other comments. Remember, the more information provided, the more accurate the generated Shell LubeAnalyst report. If a piece of equipment or component is not registered in the LubeAnalyst system, you'll need to fill out the entire form. Having additional equipment type, manufacturer and model, and by analyzing a database of historical samples meeting the same criteria, the laboratory is able to set more unit-specific flagging points. For example, certain wear patterns can be specific to a component manufacturer because each uses different metals, so what may be typical for one may not be for another. In fact, omitting or providing wrong information for a sample will create severe inaccuracies in the reporting, which could lead to incorrect maintenance diagnoses and possible component failure. So be sure to fill out every single line and checkbox accurately. This includes the sample's site name, address, and date, the equipment and components reference ID, the equipment or components OEM and model, the exact hours and miles on the truck, the exact miles of the sample, the quantity of oil added this sampling period, and the specific lubricant brand name and viscosity grade. Since an oil sample indicates the condition of the oil and the equipment at the time it's taken, it's important to promptly send it in for analysis. Be sure to print out or export your equipment list to make it easy to link your LubeAnalyst number to the correct component. You can even pre-register your sample and print a custom label to expedite the process. That way, you can quickly learn more about the operation of your equipment and, over time, compare tests and build up a performance history for a better fleet operation with Shell. You will receive your results via email, and you can find them anytime on your LubeAnalyst account page. There, you also can perform other functions to enhance your oil analysis program and review your entire fleet.